The female billionaire's son had only 48 hours to live until a shy, single-dad janitor spoke up. The conference room on the 40th floor was all glass and cold fluorescent light. 11:47 p.m. A dozen people in expensive suits surrounded a table covered in medical files and surgical imaging. And in the doorway stood a man in blue coveralls with a security guard's hand on his shoulder. He'd just been humiliated, searched, accused of corporate espionage for overhearing a conversation he wasn't supposed to hear. They'd called him a vulture, a nosy minimum-wage nobody, threatened to have him fired, prosecuted, destroyed. The billionaire herself, Victoria Ashford, third richest woman in America, had delivered the final blow with eyes like daggers. Her voice still echoed in the air. "Get him out of my sight." He should have walked away. He'd been walking away from everything for 2 years. But then he'd stopped, right there at the threshold, with every eye in the room watching his humiliation. And he'd turned back. His voice came out quiet, barely above a whisper. He hadn't used it like this in a long time. "That child doesn't have 48 hours. The room went dead silent. The billionaire stared at him like he'd lost his mind. One of the cardiac surgeons actually laughed. A short, disbelieving sound. But the janitor kept talking. And the words coming out of his mouth? They shouldn't have been possible. He described valve regurgitation patterns, ejection fraction calculations, a fatal flaw in their surgical plan using terminology only a cardiothoracic surgeon would know. One doctor's face went pale. Another pulled out his phone, fingers shaking, scrolling through old conference photos. A third asked about a scar, something only the real Marcus Chen would have. The janitor held up his left hand without a word. And that's when the room erupted. Because sometimes the person you've just humiliated is the only person in the world who can save the life you'd do anything to protect. If you believe that true power has nothing to do with wealth or status, and everything to do with the courage to speak up when it matters most, stay with this story. Because what happens next will restore your faith in second chances. Before we begin, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments, would you have had the courage to speak up after being treated like that? But to understand how a janitor became the only man who could save a billionaire's son, you have to go back 18 hours to a father who'd spent 2 years trying to disappear. The female billionaire's son had only 48 hours to live, until a shy single-dad janitor spoke up. The conference room on the 40th floor was all glass and cold fluorescent light. 11:47 p.m. A dozen people in expensive suits surrounded a table covered in medical files and surgical imaging, and in the doorway stood a man in blue coveralls with a security guard's hand on his shoulder. He'd just been humiliated, searched, accused of corporate espionage for overhearing a conversation he wasn't supposed to hear. They'd called him a vulture, a nosy, minimum-wage nobody, threatened to have him fired, prosecuted, destroyed. The billionaire herself, Victoria Ashford, third richest woman in America, had delivered the final blow with eyes like daggers. Her voice still echoed in the air. "Get him out of my sight." He should have walked away. He'd been walking away from everything for 2 years. But then he'd stopped, right there at the threshold, with every eye in the room watching his humiliation. And he'd turned back. His voice came out quiet, barely above a whisper. He hadn't used it like this in a long time. "That child doesn't have 48 hours. The room went dead silent. The billionaire stared at him like he'd lost his mind. One of the cardiac surgeons actually laughed. A short, disbelieving sound. But the janitor kept talking, and the words coming out of his mouth, they shouldn't have been possible. He described valve regurgitation patterns, ejection fraction calculations, a fatal flaw in their surgical plan using terminology only a cardiothoracic surgeon would know. One doctor's face went pale. Another pulled out his phone, fingers shaking, scrolling through old conference photos. A third asked about a scar, something only the real Marcus Chen would have. The janitor held up his left hand without a word. And that's when the room erupted. Because sometimes the person you've just humiliated is the only person in the world who can save the life you'd do anything to protect. If you believe that true power has nothing to do with wealth or status, and everything to do with the courage to speak up when it matters most, stay with this story. Because what happens next will restore your faith in second chances. Before we begin, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments, would you have had the courage to speak up after being treated like that? But to understand how a janitor became the only man who could save a billionaire's son, you have to go back 18 hours, to a father who'd spent 2 years trying to disappear. The alarm went off at 6:45. Marcus Chen opened his eyes in the dark apartment and reached over to silence it before the second beep. The room was cold. Rain tapped against the window. He sat up slowly, bare feet finding the worn carpet, and listened. Down the hall, Lily's door was still closed. Good. She needed another 15 minutes. He moved quietly to the kitchen. The linoleum was peeling near the sink. The stove had 3 working burners. He filled the kettle, set it on the heat, and pulled 2 mismatched mugs from the cupboard. One had a faded superhero logo. The other said, "World's Best Dad" in letters that had mostly washed away. While the water boiled, he cracked eggs into a bowl, whisked them with a fork, added a splash of milk. The motions were automatic. He'd made this breakfast every weekday for 2 years. At 7 o'clock, he knocked softly on Lily's door. "Morning, sweetheart." A sleepy grumble answered him. He pushed the door open. She was buried under her blankets, only the top of her dark hair visible. The room smelled like strawberry shampoo and the faint dust of old books. Paper cranes hung from strings above her bed, turning slowly in the draft from the hallway. "Come on. Breakfast in 10. She emerged from the blankets, blinking, her face creased from the pillow. 9 years old, small for her age. Elena's eyes. Marcus looked away. "I'm up," she mumbled. He left the door cracked and returned to the kitchen, scrambled the eggs, toasted bread, poured hot chocolate into the superhero mug and tea into his own. By the time Lily shuffled in, still in her pajamas, everything was on the table. She climbed into her chair and picked up her fork, took a bite, smiled a little. "Good?" he asked. "Yeah." They ate in comfortable silence. Rain drummed harder against the window. The radiator clanked. Somewhere in the building, a door slammed. Lily finished her eggs and looked up at him. "We have a project at school." "Yeah?" "About heroes. We're supposed to write about someone we think is a hero and why." Marcus sipped his tea, felt the heat settle in his chest. "Sounds like a good project. I want to write about you." He set the mug down carefully. "Lily, you saved people, Dad. That's what heroes do." "That was a long time ago." "But you did it." Her voice was soft but stubborn. She had that look, the one that said she'd already decided. Marcus reached across the table and smoothed her hair. "Write about someone else, a firefighter, a teacher, someone doing good work now." She didn't argue, just nodded and went back to her hot chocolate. But he saw the disappointment flicker across her face. After breakfast, she got dressed while he packed her lunch. Turkey sandwich, apple slices, a granola bar. He folded a napkin and tucked it in beside the sandwich. She appeared in the doorway, backpack already on. The bag was covered in paper cranes. She'd glued them on herself last month. Dozens of them. All different colors. "Ready?" he asked. Yeah. They walked together through the Greenwood neighborhood. The streets were slick with rain. The bus stop was 3 blocks away. A few other kids were already waiting with their parents. Marcus stood beside Lily, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the street. She looked up at him. "Dad? How come you don't talk about Boston anymore?" His jaw tightened. The question wasn't new. She'd asked variations of it before. He always gave the same answer. "Some things are better left in the past, sweetheart." "But don't you miss it? Helping people." The bus rounded the corner. Yellow paint streaked with rain. Brakes, hissing. Marcus crouched down to her level, looked her in the eyes. "I help people now. I help you. That's what matters." She studied his face for a moment. Then she threw her arms around his neck and hugged him tight. He closed his eyes and held her, breathing in the smell of her shampoo. "I'm proud of you anyway," she whispered. The bus door opened. She pulled back, smiled at him, and climbed aboard. He watched her find a seat by the window. She waved. He waved back. The bus pulled away, and she was gone. Marcus stood there for a moment in the rain. Then he turned and walked toward the transit station. The train was crowded. He found a spot near the back and held the overhead rail. The city slid past outside the windows. Glass towers, construction cranes, people moving fast with coffee cups and phones. He closed his eyes. Surgical lights, bright and white and unforgiving. Elena's smile, the way she kissed him goodbye that morning. "See you tonight." A little girl sitting alone in a hospital lobby. Waiting. 4 hours. His phone buzzing in the OR. The nurse's face when she read the message. Marcus opened his eyes, shook his head, focused on the window, on the rain, on the present. The train reached his stop at 8:15. He walked the last 6 blocks to Meridian Tower. The building was glass and steel, 40 floors, luxury offices, tech startups and law firms and consulting companies. He went in through the service entrance at the back, showed his badge to the security guard, took the service elevator down to the basement where the janitorial office was. His supervisor, Carol, was at her desk. She looked up when he came in. "Morning, Marcus." "Morning." "Got the schedule updates. You're still on nights. 10 to 6. "Okay." She studied him for a moment. "You know, you're the quietest person I've ever supervised." He didn't respond. "Not a complaint," she added. "Just an observation. You do good work. Never any problems. Just quiet." "Is there paperwork?" he asked. She handed him a clipboard. Timesheet adjustments. Building access updates. He signed where he needed to sign and handed it back. "That's it," Carol said. "See you tonight." Marcus nodded and left. Took the elevator back up. Walked out through the main lobby this time. The floor was polished marble. The ceiling stretched up 3 stories. People in expensive suits moved past him without looking. He was invisible here. That was the point. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was gray and heavy. He walked to the transit station, rode the train home, let himself into the empty apartment. The dishes were still on the table. He washed them, dried them, put them away. Then he went to his room, pulled the blackout curtains closed, and lay down on the bed. He needed to sleep. His shift started in 13 hours. Tonight, he'd mop the 40th floor. Tonight, everything would change. But right now, lying in the dark, Marcus Chen had no idea that the quiet life he'd built was about to shatter. He had no idea that in less than 16 hours he'd be standing in front of the people he'd spent 2 years hiding from. He had no idea that the promise he'd made to disappear forever was about to be broken by the one thing he'd never been able to walk away from. A child's life hanging in the balance. 38 floors above Marcus Chen's apartment, Victoria Ashford sat beside her son's bed and refused to let her hands shake. The penthouse suite stretched across the top 3 floors of Meridian Tower, floor-to-ceiling windows, marble countertops, art that cost more than most houses. But the medical equipment scattered throughout the master bedroom told a different story. Heart monitors, oxygen tanks, IV stands. The room smelled like antiseptic and expensive perfume. Damien lay against white pillows, his skin the color of paper. 7 years old, small for his age. Each breath was a visible effort. His chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven rhythms. Victoria held his hand. Her grip was firm, steady. She wore a tailored suit even at 9 in the morning. Hair perfect. Makeup flawless. The only sign of strain was the tension in her jaw. The laptop on the bedside table showed Dr. Patricia Nguyen's face. The cardiologist's expression was carefully neutral. "I need you to say it again," Victoria said. Her voice was clipped, controlled. Dr. Nguyen took a breath. "Damien has 48 hours, maybe less. His heart is failing too quickly for us to wait any longer." "And the surgery?" "The Chen technique is still the only viable option. But Dr. Chen disappeared 2 years ago. We've exhausted every avenue trying to locate him." Victoria's fingers tightened on Damien's hand, just slightly. "What about the surgeons who've studied his work?" 3 have attempted to replicate the technique. None successfully. The procedure is too nuanced, too dependent on real-time adjustments that Chen never fully documented. Damien stirred. His eyes fluttered open. Brown eyes, too big for his thin face. "Mommy?" Victoria's expression softened immediately. She leaned closer. "I'm here, sweetheart." "Is the doctor talking about me?" "Just checking in. You rest." Dr. Nguyen spoke quietly from the laptop. "Victoria, the 1,000th sorry. If there were another option—" "There's always another option," Victoria said. Her voice didn't rise. It never did. "I'll call you back." She closed the laptop. The room went quiet except for Damien's breathing and the soft beep of the heart monitor. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Middle-aged woman in scrubs. She'd been with them for 6 months. "Does he need anything?" "Not right now," Victoria said. The nurse nodded and withdrew. Her footsteps faded down the hallway. Damien was watching his mother's face. "Am I going to die?" Victoria didn't hesitate, didn't flinch. "No, sweetheart. Mommy's going to fix this." "Promise?" "I promise." He smiled a little. Believed her. Why wouldn't he? She'd fixed everything else in his life. Found the best doctors. Built a medical suite in their home. Moved entire hospital departments with a phone call. "I'm tired," he whispered. "Then sleep." She stayed beside him until his breathing deepened and his eyes closed. Watched the monitor. Counted the heartbeats. Each one felt fragile. Borrowed time. When she was certain he was asleep, she stood. Walked to the window. The city spread out below. Thousands of lives moving through their ordinary days. None of them mattered. Her reflection stared back from the glass. 44 years old, CEO of a company worth $12 billion. She'd built an empire through ruthless efficiency and absolute control. She'd crushed competitors, reshaped markets, made politicians answer her calls. but she couldn't save her son. Her hands began to shake. She pressed them flat against the window. Let herself have 30 seconds. 30 seconds to feel the terror clawing at her throat. 30 seconds to acknowledge that all her money, all her power, all her connections meant nothing if Damien died. 30 seconds. Then she breathed in, steadied herself, turned away from the window. There was a knock at the door. Her assistant entered. Young man in an expensive suit, tablet in hand. "The list you requested," he said. She took the tablet, scrolled through names, cardiac surgeons from around the world, all willing to attempt a modified version of the Chen technique, all with the same caveat at the end of their profiles. Success rate, 0 attempts. "None of them have done it successfully," she said. "No, ma'am. Dr. Chen's technique requires adjustments that aren't documented in any published literature. I know what it is." She handed the tablet back. "What about the investigators?" Still nothing. Chen disappeared completely. No employment records, no credit card activity, no digital footprint. If he's still in the country, he's completely off the grid. Victoria walked to the desk in the corner, sat down, opened her laptop. Her calendar was a wall of back-to-back meetings. She started canceling them, every single one. "Clear my schedule for the next 72 hours, she said. "Yes, ma'am." "And arrange an emergency medical summit, tonight, here. Bring in the 3 surgeons who've attempted Chen's technique. I want our legal team. I want Dr. Nguyen on video. I want everyone who has any knowledge of this procedure in one room." "When?" 11 p.m., 40th floor conference room. Her assistant made notes on his tablet. "What's the objective?" Victoria looked at him. Her eyes were cold. "To find a way forward. If Chen's technique can't be replicated, we modify it. If we can't modify it, we improvise. My son has 48 hours. Someone in that room is going to figure out how to save him." "And if they can't?" "They will." The assistant nodded and left. The door clicked shut behind him. Victoria sat alone in the quiet office. Through the open bedroom door, she could see Damien sleeping. The monitors beeped steadily. For now. She pulled up her contact list, started making calls. Surgeons, hospital administrators, medical researchers. Her voice never wavered. Calm, authoritative. The voice of a woman who always got what she wanted. But inside, beneath the perfect composure, something was fracturing. She'd spent 2 years searching for Marcus Chen, hired the best investigators money could buy, called in favors from FBI contacts, used every resource at her disposal, and found nothing. The man had vanished as completely as if he'd never existed. Somewhere in this city, he might be alive, might be working under a different name, might still have the skill that could save Damien, or he might be dead. Gone. The technique lost forever. She made another call, then another, assembling her team, building her plan, doing what she did best, taking control of an impossible situation and bending it to her will through sheer force of determination. By 10 a.m., the summit was arranged. By 11, she'd reviewed every piece of research on congenital heart defects published in the last 5 years. By noon, she'd memorized the names and credentials of every surgeon who'd ever worked with Dr. Chen. She would save her son. There was no other option. Failure wasn't something Victoria Ashford accepted. At 11 p.m. tonight, the best medical minds she could assemble would gather on the 40th floor of this building, and they would find a way. They had to. Because 40 floors below, a janitor she'd never noticed was already walking through her lobby. And in 13 hours, their lives would collide in a way neither of them could possibly imagine. Marcus stepped off the service elevator at 11:43 p.m. The 40th floor was usually silent at this hour. Dark. Empty. He preferred it that way. Tonight was different. Light spilled from the main conference room halfway down the hall. Voices carried through the stillness. Sharp. Tense. He pushed his cleaning cart forward slowly. The wheels squeaked against polished marble. He'd meant to oil them last week. Hadn't gotten around to it. As he approached, the voices grew clearer. A woman's voice, controlled but strained. Then a man's. Medical terminology. Technical language he hadn't heard in 2 years. Marcus stopped 10 feet from the door. It was slightly ajar. He should knock. Ask if they needed anything. That was protocol. But then he saw the screen. Through the gap in the doorway, a wall-mounted display showed cardiac imaging. Even from this distance, his trained eye caught the patterns immediately. Severe hypoplastic left heart. Multiple reconstruction attempts. Acute decompensation. He knew that defect. He'd repaired it 11 times. His hand tightened on the cart handle. Inside the room, a man was speaking. Older voice. Surgeon's cadence. Without Chen, we're attempting a procedure we're not qualified to perform. The mortality rate is over 90% with the modified technique. A woman responded, ice in her voice. Then we take the 90% chance. What other option do we have? Marcus stared at the screen, at the echo images, the ejection fraction numbers in the corner, the valve regurgitation pattern, the ventricular wall stress measurements. That child didn't have the time they thought he had. He took a step closer. Just one. His eyes tracked across the surgical plan visible on a second monitor. They were missing the critical step. The one he'd discovered during his 6th surgery. The one that wasn't in any published literature because it was too intuitive, too dependent on tactile feedback. If they operated with that approach, the child would die on the table. He shouldn't be looking, shouldn't be listening. This wasn't his business anymore. But a child was dying. Hey! Marcus jerked back. A man in a dark suit stood in the hallway. Security badge on his belt. Head of security. Marcus had seen him before, but never spoken to him. What are you doing? The security chief's voice was loud, accusatory. The voices inside the conference room stopped. Faces turned toward the door. Marcus stammered. I was just checking if you needed anything. It's part of... You were eavesdropping. No, I was on a confidential corporate meeting. The security chief moved closer. Were you recording anything? What? No, I don't. The conference room door swung open fully. A woman stood there. Mid-40s, expensive suit, perfect hair, eyes like steel. Marcus recognized her from the building directory. Victoria Ashford, CEO, owned the top 3 floors. She looked at him the way people look at dirt on their shoe. What is this? She snapped. The security chief gestured at Marcus. Found him standing outside the door, staring at the screens. Possible corporate espionage. I wasn't, Marcus started. Victoria cut him off. Do you have any idea what we're discussing in here? This is private medical information, proprietary research. You're a janitor. You have no business. I was checking if you needed anything, Marcus said quietly. That's my job. Your job is to clean when we're not here. Her voice was sharp, cutting. Not to spy on confidential meetings. Who sent you? Which competitor? No one. I just saw the light and... Empty your pockets. Marcus blinked. What? You heard me. Empty your pockets. Now. She turned to the security chief. Search his cart, too. Check for recording devices. Heat flooded Marcus's face. Inside the conference room, a dozen people were watching. Lawyers in suits. surgeons in dress clothes, all of them staring at him like he was a criminal. "Ma'am, I wasn't empty. Your pockets." Each word was a blade. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone, his wallet, a folded piece of paper, Lily's latest origami crane, the one she'd given him that morning. He set them on the cart. The security chief searched through his cleaning supplies, checked his phone, found nothing. "He's clean," the security chief muttered. Victoria wasn't satisfied. Her face was flushed, her composure cracking. "You're a nosy minimum-wage vulture. That's what you are. Standing there, listening to things you couldn't possibly understand, probably planning to sell whatever you heard to the tabloids." Marcus stood silent. Every word landed like a physical blow. "I could have you prosecuted," Victoria continued, her voice rising. "Medical privacy violations, corporate espionage. You'll never work in this city again." The security chief's hand closed on Marcus's shoulder. "Let's go." They walked him toward the door, past the lawyers, past the surgeons, past Victoria, who watched him with contempt so thick he could taste it. At the threshold, the security chief's grip tightened. Marcus stopped. His hand found the doorframe. Behind him, the conference room waited for him to leave, for this humiliation to end, for the janitor to disappear back into invisibility where he belonged. But on that screen, cardiac imaging showed a child with maybe 20 hours to live, and a surgical plan that would kill him. Marcus's voice came out quiet, barely above a whisper. He hadn't used it like this in 2 years. "That child doesn't have 48 hours. The room went still. Victoria stared at him. "What did you say?" Every instinct screamed at Marcus to stay silent, to leave, to protect the quiet life he'd built, to keep the promise he'd made to Lily and Elena's memory. But he turned back. "Based on the ejection fraction and valve regurgitation I saw on that screen, your son has less than 24 hours. His voice was steadier now, clearer. "And the surgical approach you're planning will kill him. You're missing a critical step in the valve reconstruction, a step that's not in any published literature." Victoria's face twisted. "How dare you?" But one of the surgeons interrupted. Middle-aged man, white coat over his dress shirt. He was staring at Marcus with sudden, sharp focus. "Wait!" The surgeon's voice cut through the room. "Say that again. The valve reconstruction step." Marcus's heart pounded, but the words came anyway. Technical detail, surgical terminology, the tactile feedback points, the real-time adjustments required during the procedure. Things only a cardiothoracic surgeon would know. The surgeon went pale. "Who are you?" Marcus's throat tightened. "My name is Marcus Chen." The room erupted. "That's impossible," Victoria said. "Chen disappeared." But the surgeons were already moving, phones out, pulling up images, old conference photos, comparing faces. One of them made a call, put it on speaker. A voice answered from Boston Children's Hospital, groggy, confused. "This is Dr. Walsh." "Jim, it's Patterson. Quick question. Did Marcus Chen have any identifying marks? Physical characteristics?" "What? Why are you—" "Please, it's urgent." A pause. Yeah. Distinctive scar on his left hand. Childhood accident. Kitchen knife. Why?" The surgeon looked at Marcus, nodded at his hands. Marcus held up his left hand wordlessly. The scar ran across his palm, white against his skin. Unmistakable. Someone gasped. Another surgeon asked a question, specific, detailed, about a surgery in 2019, a complication Marcus had solved in real time, something that was never officially recorded. Marcus answered, perfectly, every detail precise. 8 minutes of verification, phone calls, photo comparisons, Questions only the real Marcus Chen could answer. Victoria stood frozen. Her face had gone from rage to confusion to something that looked like shock. Finally, one of the surgeons turned to her. His voice was shaking. "It's him. The janitor is Marcus Chen." The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria's hands were trembling. Her perfect composure shattered. She tried to speak, failed, tried again. "Can you save my son?" Marcus moved to the conference table and spread the imaging files across its surface. MRI scans, echo results, blood work, surgical history. He studied each one with the focused intensity of a man who'd spent 12 years reading hearts like other people read books. The room had gone quiet. Everyone watched him. The janitor in blue coveralls hunched over medical files like he belonged there. He looked up after 2 minutes. "You don't have 48 hours. Victoria's breath caught. Dr. Nguyen said she was being optimistic. Marcus pointed to the most recent echo. "Look at the ejection fraction trend. It's dropping faster than the model predicts. And here?" He tapped another image. "This valve is deteriorating in real time. You have 20 hours. Maybe less." One of the surgeons leaned in, studied the images. His face went pale. "He's right." "Then we operate now," Victoria said. Her voice was sharp, controlled, but Marcus heard the tremor underneath. "Not here." Marcus straightened. "We need a fully equipped pediatric cardiac OR specialized team. This is a 14-hour surgery minimum. We need to be at Seattle Grace Medical Center within 2 hours." Victoria turned to her assistant. "Make it happen." The young man was already on his phone. "I'll call the hospital administrator." Marcus pulled out a piece of paper from the conference table notepad, started writing. "I need these people. Dr. Sarah Kim, anesthesiologist. She trained on pediatric cases. Dr. James Patterson, assist. He knows the anatomy. And a perfusionist named Chen, no relation, who's worked bypass on infant cases." "They're all in Seattle?" Victoria asked. "They should be. Kim and Patterson were at Seattle Grace 2 years ago. Chen might have moved." "Find out." The assistant was making rapid notes. Victoria stood beside him, watching Marcus with an expression that kept shifting. Confusion, awe, something that might have been shame. She opened her mouth. "Dr. Chen, There's no time," Marcus said. "Not unkind, just factual. Your son needs surgery. Everything else can wait." She closed her mouth, nodded. One of the surgeons, the older one who'd verified Marcus's identity, cleared his throat. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus looked at him. "Why did you disappear? 2 years ago, you were at the top of the field. Then nothing. No forwarding address. No contact information. People looked for you." The question hung in the air. Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. "I'm sorry," the surgeon said quickly. "It's not my business. It's fine." Marcus's voice was flat. "But right now, we need to focus on getting your team to Seattle Grace. Time's running out." The assistant was on his 3rd phone call. Hospital administrator or scheduling, equipment requisition. Victoria stood beside him, adding her weight to each request. Money talked, doors opened. Marcus stepped into the hallway. The building was silent, empty, just fluorescent lights and the hum of the ventilation system. He pulled out his phone. The screen showed 12:14 a.m. He scrolled to Lily's number, hesitated. She should be asleep. But he'd promised. Always. If he wasn't going to be home, he'd call. The phone rang twice. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Dad?" Her voice was small, worried. "Where are you?" "I'm still at work, sweetheart. Something came up." "Are you okay?" Marcus leaned against the wall, closed his eyes. Yeah, I'm okay. But I need to help someone tonight. I won't be home until tomorrow. Silence on the other end. Then, what kind of help? He could lie. Should lie. Keep the promise he'd made 2 years ago. But the words wouldn't come. There's a little boy who's very sick, Marcus said quietly. And I'm the only one who can help him. Are you doing doctor stuff again? The question was so simple, so direct, but it cut straight through to the truth. Marcus took a breath. Yes. Another pause, longer this time. He could hear her breathing on the other end, processing. I love you, Dad. His throat tightened. I love you too, sweetheart. And I'm proud of you. He had to look away from the phone, had to blink hard against the sudden pressure behind his eyes. Thank you, Lily. Be safe, okay? I will. Promise? I promise. They said goodbye. He stood there for a moment after the call ended, phone still pressed to his ear, trying to steady himself. Boston Children's Hospital, March 14th, 2023. The memory came unbidden. Marcus in surgical scrubs, gowned, masked, standing over a 3-month-old with a failing heart. The surgery was supposed to take 6 hours. It took 9. Complications, unexpected bleeding, a valve that wouldn't hold. His phone had buzzed in his pocket. Once, twice, 3 times. The scrub nurse had noticed. Do you need to check that? No, he'd said. I'm good. Another buzz. Another. He'd ignored them all, stayed focused. The child on the table needed him. That was the only thing that mattered. He'd saved that baby. Closed the chest at 8:47 p.m., stripped off his gloves, walked out of the OR feeling like he'd run a marathon. Then he'd checked his phone. 7 missed calls from Elena. 3 from the school. 1 from the hospital switchboard, and a text from an unknown number. This is Seattle PD. Please call immediately regarding Elena Chen. The memory shattered. Marcus opened his eyes. He was in Meridian Tower, 40th floor, 2 years later, and a different child was dying. He pushed off the wall, walked back into the conference room. Victoria's assistant looked up. Seattle Grace is ready. OR3, prepped for pediatric cardiac. Dr. Kim is on her way in. Dr. Patterson, too. The perfusionist you wanted retired last year, but we found his replacement, Dr. Linda Torres. She's got the same experience. Marcus nodded. That works. Cars are waiting downstairs, Victoria said. We can be there in 20 minutes. Good. She looked at him. Really looked at him. Thank you. Marcus didn't respond, just gathered the imaging files and headed for the door. The team followed. Lawyers, surgeons, Victoria herself. They took the elevator down in silence. The building's lobby was empty, vast. Their footsteps echoed on marble. 3 black SUVs waited at the curb. Marcus climbed into the back of the first one. Victoria slid in beside him. Her assistant took the front seat. The driver pulled away from the curb. Seattle's streets were nearly empty at this hour. Rain had started again. It streaked across the windows. Marcus watched the city slide past. His hands were in his lap. They were trembling, just slightly. He pressed them together, forced them still. In 2 hours, he'd be standing over an operating table for the first time in 2 years, holding a scalpel, making decisions that would determine whether a 7-year-old boy lived or died. And all he could think about was the last time he'd made those decisions, the child he'd saved, and the wife he'd lost while saving that child. The SUV turned onto the highway, picked up speed. Rain hammered the roof. 20 minutes to Seattle Grace Medical Center. Then the real test would begin. The pre-op area smelled like disinfectant and latex. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Marcus stood at the scrub sink, water running hot over his hands. He'd done this thousands of times. The motions should have been automatic, but his hands were shaking. He scrubbed in silence. Soap, water, brush under the nails, between the fingers. The same ritual he'd performed before every surgery for 12 years. The same ritual he'd abandoned 2 years ago. The scrub nurse appeared beside him. Older woman. Kind eyes behind her mask. "You okay, doctor?" Marcus nodded. Didn't trust his voice. She studied him for a moment. "First time back?" "Yeah." "You'll be fine." She handed him a sterile towel. Muscle memory's a powerful thing. He dried his hands, forced them steady. The shaking subsided. Just barely. The operating room was cold, bright. Damien lay on the table, small and still under the surgical drapes. Only his chest was visible. Pale skin. Thin ribs. The monitors beeped steadily beside him. Marcus approached the table. The surgical team was already in position. "Doctor!" Sarah Kim at the head, managing anesthesia. Dr. James Patterson to Marcus's right, ready to assist. The perfusionist stood beside the heart-lung bypass machine. A scrub nurse held the instrument tray. They were all watching him. Marcus stood over Damien, looked down at the 7-year-old boy whose life depended on what happened in the next 14 hours. Boston Children's Hospital, March 14th, 2023. The memory hit him like a physical blow. A 3-month-old on the table. Failing heart. Emergency surgery. Marcus in position, scalpel in hand, making the first incision. His phone buzzing in the pocket of his scrubs. Once, twice, 3 times. The scrub nurse had asked, "Do you need to check that?" "No, I'm good." He'd stayed, chosen to stay. The surgery took 9 hours instead of 6. Complications, bleeding, a valve that wouldn't hold. But Marcus had stayed because that was what you did. You stayed until the job was done. While Elena rushed across the city to pick up Lily from school. While she drove too fast in rush-hour traffic. While her car skidded on wet pavement and collided with a semi-truck at 45 miles per hour. While Marcus saved a stranger's child, his wife died alone in the wreckage. The phone call came at 8:53 p.m. Seattle, PD. He'd walked out of the OR in his surgical scrubs, still wearing his mask, still wearing gloves sticky with blood. He'd arrived at the emergency room 20 minutes later. They'd led him to a curtained bay. Elena was on the gurney, monitors silent. Her hand was still warm when he held it. She'd died while he was closing the chest on another child. "Dr. Chen?" Marcus blinked. He was back in Seattle Grace, in the present. Dr. Kim was watching him from behind her mask. "Are we ready to begin?" she asked. Marcus looked down at Damien, at the small chest rising and falling under sedation. He thought of Lily's voice on the phone an hour ago. "I'm proud of you, Dad." He reached for the scalpel. The instrument felt foreign in his hand. Too light, too sharp. He hadn't held one in 2 years, but his hand didn't shake. "Beginning incision," Marcus said. The blade touched skin. Blood welled along the line. He cut with steady pressure, through skin, through tissue, down to the sternum. The team moved with him, suction, retractors, every motion coordinated. The saw came next. Marcus cut through bone. The sternum separated. Rib spreaders went in. Damien's chest opened like a book. And there was the heart, small, damaged, reconstructed 3 times already. Scar tissue everywhere. The valves were failing. The ventricles were dilated. The whole structure was fragile. But Marcus could see it, could read it. The patterns were clear. His hands moved. 2 years of mopping floors fell away. 2 years of silence and grief and hiding. All of it gone. In this moment, he was who he used to be, who he was always meant to be. Doctor. Patterson handed him instruments before he asked for them. The scrub nurse anticipated every need. Dr. Kim monitored vitals with quiet efficiency. The team moved like a single organism. Marcus worked through the preliminary reconstruction, clearing scar tissue, preparing the valve sites, setting up for the bypass machine. Each step precise, controlled. The perfusionist cannulated the major vessels. Ready for bypass? Go ahead, Marcus said. The machine hummed to life. Damien's blood began flowing through plastic tubing. The heart slowed, stopped. The bypass machine took over. Marcus began the real work. The valve reconstruction was delicate. Millimeter adjustments, sutures placed with absolute precision. This was the step no one else could replicate. The step that required feel more than sight. Tactile feedback. Intuition. He worked in silence. The only sounds were the monitors and the soft hum of the bypass machine. His world narrowed to the space in front of him, to the tiny heart under his hands, to the tissue that had to hold, to the life that depended on him getting this exactly right. An hour passed, then 2, then 4. A nurse glanced at the clock. 6:30 a.m. Marcus didn't respond, didn't look up. He was deep in the reconstruction now, building the valve assembly, layer by layer, suture by suture. Dr. Patterson watched in silence. After a while, he whispered to the scrub nurse, "I've never seen anyone work like this." Marcus finished the first valve, moved to the second. The technique was coming back. Not just the steps, but the rhythm. The way his hands knew what to do before his brain caught up. Muscle memory, instinct. 12 years of training and experience flooding back all at once. Hour 5. The second valve was complete. Hour 6. Marcus started on the ventricular reconstruction. And that's when he saw it. The tissue along the valve annulus. It was thinner than it should be. Weaker. He'd seen it on the imaging, but now, with his hands actually in the chest cavity, he could feel how fragile it was. If he sutured it the standard way, it wouldn't hold. The tissue would tear. The valve would fail. And Damien would die on this table. Marcus's hands went still. The team noticed immediately. Dr. Kim looked up from her monitors. Dr. Patterson leaned closer. "Problem?" Patterson asked quietly. Marcus stared at the tissue, at the complication he'd feared from the moment he saw the imaging. The one test that would determine if he was truly back. If 2 years away had cost him the edge that made him the best. His hands hovered over the open chest, and for the first time since the surgery began, they started to shake. Hour 12, 8:30 in the morning. The operating room lights were still bright, the monitors still beeped, but everyone in the room was exhausted. Marcus's shoulders ached, his feet hurt. He'd been standing over the table for 12 hours without a break. The surgical team had rotated in shifts, but he'd stayed. Couldn't leave, wouldn't leave. He was working on the final valve reconstruction when he saw it. Bleeding. Unexpected. Right along the valve annulus where the tissue was thinnest. Blood pooled in the chest cavity. Dark red. Too much. Marcus's hands went still. Dr. Patterson leaned in, saw the blood. His voice was tight. "We have bleeding in the annulus." "I see it," Marcus said. The scrub nurse moved quickly. Suction. The blood cleared just long enough for Marcus to assess the damage. The tissue along the valve ring had torn. A small tear. But in tissue, this fragile small was enough. Patterson reached for an instrument. Standard repair should handle this. That won't hold, Marcus said. Patterson paused. What? The tissue's too friable. If we use standard sutures, it'll tear worse. We'll lose the whole valve. The room went quiet. Everyone was listening now. Doctor. Kim's voice came from behind her monitors. Blood pressure dropping. 80/50. 75/48. The numbers were falling. Damien's body was losing blood faster than they could replace it. Marcus stared at the torn tissue, at the valve that had to hold, at the child who would die if this didn't work. He'd seen this complication before. Once. 7 years ago in Boston. Different patient. Different defect. But the same fragile tissue. The same impossible problem. He'd solved it then. Barely. Using a technique he'd improvised on the spot. A combination of two different suture patterns that shouldn't work together but somehow did. He'd never written it down. Never taught it. Never tried it again. And now he had maybe 10 minutes to remember exactly how he'd done it. Marcus? Patterson's voice was uncertain. What do we do? Marcus took a breath. I'm going to try something. It's not standard protocol, but it's the only thing that'll work. What technique? One I invented. Once. A long time ago. Kim called out again. 70/42. He's dropping fast. Then we need to move, Marcus said. I'll need a 5/0 Proline suture and a 4/0 silk, both. The scrub nurse handed him the instruments without question. Marcus positioned the needles, started talking, not to himself, to the team. They needed to know what he was doing in case he failed, in case someone else had to finish. I'm using a double-layer technique. The Proline goes deep, into the stronger tissue below the tear. The silk goes superficial, distributing the tension across a wider area. Neither one alone would hold, but together they create a mesh that reinforces without adding pressure. He worked as he spoke. First suture, deep, precise. The Proline thread caught the tissue beneath the tear. He pulled it snug, not tight, just enough. Second suture, superficial. The silk thread spread the load. His hands moved with absolute focus. Every motion deliberate, controlled. 68/39, Kim said. Her voice was steady, but the numbers weren't good. Marcus kept working. Third suture, fourth. The pattern was coming back to him now. Muscle memory. The way his hands had moved 7 years ago in a different OR in a different city. 5 minutes passed. The bleeding was still there, still pooling. 10 minutes. Marcus placed the 8th suture. The tissue was holding. Barely. 15 minutes. The bleeding started to slow. Patterson was watching in silence. After a while, he whispered to the scrub nurse, I've never seen this before. Neither have I, she whispered back. 20 minutes. Marcus placed the final suture, tied it off, cut the thread. The valve annulus was intact. The tissue was reinforced. The bleeding stopped. He waited, watching. 5 seconds. 10. 15. The tissue held. Bleeding's controlled, Patterson said quietly. Dr. Torres, the perfusionist, checked her monitors. Cardiac output stabilizing. Blood pressure rising. 72/45. 75/48. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The scrub nurse was staring at the valve, at the suture pattern. That's beautiful. Marcus didn't respond. He was already moving to the next step, the rest of the reconstruction. The work wasn't done. He finished the valve assembly, closed the atrium, checked every connection, every suture, every reconstructed vessel. Hour 13. The heart was complete, rebuilt, better than it had been before. Hour 14. The final sutures. Marcus worked in silence. The team moved around him like a well-oiled machine. Everyone knew their role. Everyone trusted him. The bypass machine hummed steadily. Damien's blood flowed through plastic tubing. His heart sat still in his chest, waiting. Marcus placed the last suture, tied it off, stepped back. "We're ready to wean off bypass," he said. The room shifted. This was the moment. The test. Everything they'd done for the last 14 hours came down to this. Either Damien's reconstructed heart would take over, or it wouldn't. "Doctor." Torres looked at Marcus. "On your word." Marcus nodded. "Begin wean." Torres adjusted the bypass machine. Slowly, carefully. The machine did less. The heart had to do more. Everyone watched the monitors. Damien's heart began to beat, slow at first, then stronger. The rhythm was steady, regular. The pressure held. 50% bypass. The heart was carrying half the load, 25%. 3/4 of the work was Damien's heart now, 10%. 0. The bypass machine went silent. Damien's heart was beating on its own, stronger than before, healthier than it had been in years. The monitors showed clean numbers, good pressure, strong output, no arrhythmias. Marcus watched for 30 seconds, then 60, then 90. The heart held. He looked at Dr. Kim. Vitals? Stable. Blood pressure 100/60. Heart rate 85. Oxygen saturation 98%. She looked up from her monitors. Her eyes were bright above her mask. "He's doing great." Marcus turned to Dr. Torres. Cardiac output 4.2 liters per minute. That's excellent for his size and age. Patterson was staring at the heart, at the valves Marcus had rebuilt. "It's perfect." Marcus began closing the chest, layer by layer, tissue, muscle, sternum, skin. His hands were steady. Sure, the exhaustion would come later. Right now, there was only the work. 2:47 p.m. He placed the final staple. Marcus stepped back from the table, pulled off his gloves, looked at the monitors one more time. Every number was exactly where it should be. He turned to the team. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the room. "He's going to live." The OR erupted, not with shouts or cheers, but with the quiet, profound relief of people who just witnessed something extraordinary. The scrub nurse's shoulders sagged. Dr. Patterson closed his eyes for a moment. Dr. Kim smiled behind her mask. "Doctor." Torres nodded slowly, respect in her eyes. They'd saved him, against impossible odds, with a technique no one else could replicate. After 14 hours of surgery that had pushed every single one of them to their limits, Damien Ashford was going to live. But Marcus knew something the others didn't, something that made his jaw tighten as he walked out of the OR to scrub out. The hardest part wasn't over, because in a few hours, he'd have to face the boy's mother. And Victoria Ashford was not the type of woman who accepted being wrong, or being grateful, or admitting that the janitor she'd humiliated had just saved the one thing in the world she couldn't buy. 7 p.m. Damien was stable in the pediatric recovery suite. The monitors showed steady numbers, strong heartbeat, good oxygen levels. The reconstructed heart was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. Victoria stood outside the recovery room window. Her hands were pressed flat against the glass. She'd been standing there for an hour, just watching. Her son was alive, breathing. The color was already returning to his cheeks. The door opened behind her. Marcus stepped out. He'd changed out of his surgical scrubs into street clothes, jeans, a plain shirt. He looked exhausted. Victoria turned. Their eyes met. For a long moment, neither spoke. "Thank you," she said finally. The words came out stiff, formal. Marcus nodded. Didn't say anything back. "Can we speak privately?" Victoria gestured down the hallway. "There are some matters we need to discuss." Marcus followed her to the VIP lounge. Private space, leather furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A man in an expensive suit was already waiting inside. Victoria's lawyer. He had a folder on the table in front of him. The hospital administrator stood near the door, nervous, watching. Victoria sat, gestured for Marcus to do the same. He remained standing. "Dr. Chen," she began. Back to business mode. Voice controlled. "What you did today was extraordinary. My son is alive because of you. I want to compensate you appropriately." The lawyer slid the folder across the table. "We've prepared an agreement. $5 million. In exchange for your discretion regarding the events of last night and today." Marcus looked at the folder. Didn't touch it. "It's a standard NDA," the lawyer continued. "No media interviews, no public discussion of the case, no social media posts. The payment would be made within 48 hours. "Open it," Victoria said. "Read it." Marcus picked up the folder, scanned the first page. Legal language, dense paragraphs. The number 5 million appeared multiple times. He set it down. "No," he said quietly. Victoria's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry? I'm not signing that." "Dr. Chen, $5 million is an extremely generous—" "I don't want your money." The lawyer leaned forward. "Perhaps you don't understand what we're offering. This is—" "I understand perfectly," Marcus said. His voice was still quiet, still calm. "You want me to pretend last night didn't happen. You want to buy my silence about how you treated me. The answer is no." Victoria stood. Her composure was cracking. That incident was witnessed by a dozen people. My entire medical team, my lawyers, security personnel. If that story gets out, it damages my company, my reputation, everything I've built. "Then you shouldn't have done it," Marcus said. Her face flushed. "I was desperate. My son was dying. I wasn't thinking clearly." "I know." "Then you understand why this needs to stay private." "I understand why you want it to stay private," Marcus said. "But I'm not going to pretend your cruelty didn't happen." The lawyer's tone shifted, became harder. "Dr. Chen, let me be clear about something. You accessed confidential patient information without authorization. You overheard a private medical discussion. You could be seen as having violated HIPAA regulations." Marcus looked at him, said nothing. "If this matter becomes public," the lawyer continued, "we would be forced to protect Ms. Ashford's interests. That could include legal action against you, a lawsuit, potentially criminal charges depending on how the district attorney views your actions." The hospital administrator shifted uncomfortably near the door. Marcus turned to Victoria. "The first overheard a conversation in a hallway. I offered to help. Your son is alive." He paused. "If you want to make that a legal battle, that's your choice." He walked toward the door. "Wait," Victoria said. Her voice cracked slightly. "You don't understand what you're doing. I have resources, lawyers. I can make this very difficult for you." Marcus stopped, turned back. "I didn't save your son for money. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because staying silent would have made me complicit in his death." His voice was steady, quiet, but every word carried weight. "What you do now is up to you, but I won't lie about what happened. Not for 5 million. Not for any amount." He left the room. The door closed softly behind him. Victoria stood motionless. Her hands were trembling. The lawyer was already pulling out his phone. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. "Draft the lawsuit." On what grounds? HIPAA violation, corporate espionage, unauthorized access to proprietary medical information. She was grasping now, desperate. Whatever will stick. Ms. Ashford, I have to advise you that— Just do it, she snapped. The hospital administrator cleared his throat. Ma'am, Dr. Chen saved your son's life. Victoria turned on him. I'm aware of that, but he's also refusing to protect my interests, refusing a very generous settlement. If he wants to be difficult, then we'll be difficult right back. The administrator said nothing more, just looked uncomfortable. Victoria walked back to the window, looked out at the city lights. Her reflection stared back at her. Perfectly styled hair, expensive suit. The face of a woman who'd just won everything and lost everything at the same time. Her son was alive, but the man who saved him had just walked away, and she'd threatened to sue him for it. She pressed her palm against the glass. It felt cold. Draft it, she said again. I want the papers filed by Monday. The lawyer nodded and left. The administrator followed quietly. Victoria stood alone in the VIP lounge. Through the glass, she could see Damien's recovery room down the hall. Her son, alive, breathing. And she was about to destroy the man who'd given him that breath. Marcus rode the bus home. 9 p.m. The city was dark. Rain had started again. It streaked across the windows. He thought about the contract. $5 million. Enough to change his and Lily's lives completely. New apartment, college fund, security. All he had to do was stay silent about being humiliated, about being called a vulture, about being searched like a criminal in front of a room full of strangers. All he had to do was pretend it didn't matter. He leaned his head against the window, watched the rain. The bus reached his stop 20 minutes later. He walked the 3 blocks to his apartment building, climbed the stairs, unlocked the door. Lily was waiting up, still in her pajamas. She ran to him the moment he walked in. Dad! He caught her, held her, felt the weight of her against his chest. You're home, she said. I'm home. She pulled back, looked up at him. Did you save the kid? Marcus nodded. Lily's face broke into a huge smile. I knew you would. He held his daughter and felt something settle in his chest. He'd made the right choice. Victoria could threaten lawsuits. She could use every resource at her disposal. But he'd told the truth. He'd helped when a child needed help. And he'd come home to his daughter. Nothing else mattered. But 3 days later, a process server would knock on their door. And Marcus would learn that sometimes doing the right thing came with a price that money couldn't measure. 3 days after the surgery, someone knocked on Marcus's door at 2 in the afternoon. He was making lunch for Lily, grilled cheese sandwiches. She was at the kitchen table doing homework, humming softly to herself. Marcus opened the door. A man in a suit stood in the hallway. He held a manila envelope. Marcus Chen. Yes. You've been served. The man handed him the envelope and walked away. Marcus closed the door slowly, looked down at the envelope in his hands. Official seal. Law firm letterhead. He already knew what it was. He sat down at the kitchen table, opened the envelope, pulled out the papers. Lily looked up from her homework. What's that? Marcus scanned the first page. Legal terminology, dense paragraphs. But the meaning was clear. Victoria Ashford was suing him for HIPAA violation and corporate espionage. She was claiming he'd accessed confidential patient information without authorization, that he'd overheard proprietary medical discussions, that his actions constituted a breach of privacy laws. She was asking for damages and an injunction preventing him from discussing the case publicly. Dad. Marcus set the papers down. Remember the little boy I helped? The one who was sick? Yeah. His mother is upset that I helped him. Lily's face scrunched up. She looked at the papers, then at her father. That's dumb. Despite everything, Marcus smiled. Yeah, it is. You saved his life. I did. Then why is she upset? Marcus thought about how to explain it, how to make sense of something that didn't make sense. Sometimes people do things that hurt them, and instead of saying sorry, they get angry at the person who saw it happen. Lily considered this. That's still dumb. You're right. She went back to her homework. Marcus sat there looking at the lawsuit, 5 pages of legal threats, all because he'd refused to stay silent about being humiliated. His phone rang that evening. Unknown number. He answered cautiously. Mr. Chen? This is Sarah Mitchell. I'm a medical journalist with the Seattle Times. Marcus's grip on the phone tightened. How did you get this number? I have a source at Seattle Grace, one of the surgical nurses who was in the OR with you. She paused. Mr. Chen, I know what happened. The humiliation at Meridian Tower, the lawsuit, and I have security footage from the building that shows the entire incident. Marcus's breath caught. How did you... My source leaked it. She was horrified by what Ms. Ashford is trying to do. She wanted the truth to come out. Another pause. I'd like your comment for a story I'm writing. I want to tell your side. Marcus walked to the window, looked out at the street below. I don't want publicity. I understand, but this story is going to run with or without your comment. Ms. Ashford is a public figure. Her son's medical crisis and your involvement are already documented. The question is whether people hear the full truth or just her version. He closed his eyes, thought about Lily, about keeping their quiet life intact, about staying invisible. But that life was already gone. The moment he'd spoken up in that conference room, everything had changed. What do you want to know? He said quietly. The interview lasted 20 minutes. Marcus spoke plainly. No drama. No embellishment. He explained that he'd overheard a medical discussion, recognized a pattern he'd seen before, offered to help, saved a child's life. And now he was being sued for it. Sarah Mitchell asked the question that mattered. Why did you come forward? You'd walked away from medicine. You were living a quiet life. Why risk everything for a stranger's child? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because staying silent would have made me complicit in that child's death. I couldn't do that. Not again. The story broke 6 hours later. By 10 p.m., it was everywhere. News websites, social media, cable news. The headline was simple and devastating. Billionaire sues janitor who saved her dying son. The security footage played on loop. Marcus being searched. Victoria calling him a vulture. The humiliation witnessed by a room full of people. Then the verification. The reveal. The truth. The public response was immediate. Brutal. Overwhelming. People were outraged. How could a mother sue the man who saved her child? How could someone with that much wealth and power be so cruel to someone who'd helped her? Victoria's corporate board released a statement by midnight. The board of Ashford Global Holdings does not condone the personal actions of our CEO. We are reviewing the situation and will make further statements as appropriate. Advocacy groups jumped in. Medical ethics organizations. Patient rights activists. They all condemned the lawsuit. Called it frivolous. Called it vindictive. By morning, Damien's surgical team had released their own statement. Dr. Kim, Dr. Patterson, Dr. Torres. All of them praising Marcus's skill, his integrity, his life-saving intervention. The lawsuit disappeared by noon the next day. Quietly withdrawn. No explanation. No apology. But Victoria's lawyers released a statement that afternoon. Carefully worded, strategically timed. Ms. Ashford deeply regrets the misunderstanding that occurred during an extraordinarily stressful time. She is profoundly grateful to Dr. Marcus Chen for saving her son's life. She has established the Damien Ashford Foundation for Pediatric Cardiac Research with an initial endowment of $50 million to honor Dr. Chen's contribution and support children facing similar medical challenges. Marcus read the statement on his phone, sat in his kitchen. Lily was at school. The apartment was quiet. His phone had been ringing nonstop. Interview requests, talk show invitations, people wanting his story, wanting him to speak, to appear, to become something he'd never wanted to be. A reporter caught him outside his building that afternoon. Camera, microphone, bright lights. "Dr. Chen, what's your response to Ms. Ashford's statement?" Marcus looked at the camera, then at the reporter. "I don't have one." "Will you accept any media offers? People want to hear your story." "No." "Why not?" Marcus thought about it, about everything that had happened, about Lily, about Elena, about the quiet life he'd tried to build, and the extraordinary moment that had shattered it. "I didn't do this for recognition," he said. "I just want to get back to my daughter." He walked past the camera, went inside, locked the door. The media circus continued for another week. But Marcus stayed silent, declined every request, let the story fade. And eventually, it did. But something had changed, something he couldn't take back. The world knew who he was now, knew what he could do. And 3 weeks later, a call would come that would change everything again. An offer from Seattle Children's Hospital. Part-time consulting position. Complex pediatric cardiac cases. A schedule that would let him pick Lily up from school every single day at 3:15 p.m. The quiet life was over. But maybe, just maybe, something better was beginning. 3 months later, Marcus sat in his new office at Seattle Children's Hospital. The room was small. A desk, 2 chairs, a window that looked out over the city. Paper cranes hung from strings near the ceiling. Dozens of them, all folded by Lily. It was 2:30 in the afternoon. He had 30 minutes before he needed to leave to pick her up from school. A nurse knocked on the open door. "Dr. Chen, I have a new consult for you." Marcus looked up. "Come in." She handed him a file. He opened it. 3-month-old infant. Severe hypoplastic left heart syndrome. Multiple failed intervention attempts. The imaging looked familiar. Very familiar. It was the same defect Damien had had. "When did this come in?" Marcus asked. "This morning. The family's been to 3 hospitals. Everyone says the same thing. They need the Chen technique." Marcus studied the images, the valve patterns, the ventricular structure. He could see exactly what needed to be done. "Schedule surgery for next Tuesday. I'll need the same team from the Ashford case." "Dr. Kim and Dr. Patterson?" "Yes, and Dr. Torres on perfusion." The nurse made notes. "I'll set it up." After she left, Marcus sat with the file open in front of him. 3 months ago, he'd been mopping floors. Now he was back in the world he'd left behind. But it was different this time. He worked 3 days a week, operated on the most complex cases, trained other surgeons in his technique, shared everything he'd learned, the steps he'd never published, the intuitive adjustments, the real-time decisions, and every day at 3 p.m. he left. No exceptions, no emergencies that couldn't wait, no surgeries scheduled past his hours. Because every day at 3:15, he picked Lily up from school. The door opened again. Lily walked in. Backpack covered in paper cranes. She smiled when she saw him. "You're early," he said. "Half day. Teacher conferences." She dropped her backpack and climbed into the chair across from his desk, pulled out a sheet of colored paper, started folding. Marcus watched her work. Her fingers moved with practiced precision. Crease, fold, turn, another crane taking shape. "Who's this one for?" he asked. "The kids in the cardiac wing. Nurse Amy said they like them." "They do." She finished the crane, held it up. "What do you think?" "Perfect." Lily added it to the collection on his desk. There were already 15 there, all waiting to be delivered to young patients down the hall. They sat together in comfortable silence. Marcus reviewed the imaging for Tuesday's surgery. Lily folded another crane. The afternoon sun came through the window. Warm, gentle. This was what peace felt like. Across the city, in a gleaming office tower, Victoria Ashford stood at a press conference. Cameras flashed. Reporters held up microphones. She wore a tailored suit. Perfect makeup. Her voice was controlled as she announced the latest grant from the Damien Ashford Foundation for Pediatric Cardiac Research. $50 million to Seattle Children's Hospital. Funding for training programs. Equipment. Research into congenital heart defects. Whether it was genuine redemption or strategic reputation management, no one could say for certain. But the money was real. The programs were real. Children would be saved because of it. Damien stood beside his mother. 7 years old, healthy, strong. No more pale skin. No more struggling to breathe. His reconstructed heart beat steadily in his chest. And in his pocket, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, was a small paper crane, blue and gold, folded by a 9-year-old girl named Lily, given to him by the man who'd saved his life. He carried it everywhere. That Saturday, Marcus and Lily drove to Greenwood Cemetery. The sky was clear. The air was cool. They walked through rows of headstones until they reached the one they were looking for. Elena Chen, beloved wife and mother. Marcus stood in front of the stone. Lily stood beside him. Neither spoke for a long moment. Then Marcus crouched down, pulled a paper crane from his pocket. One Lily had folded that morning. He placed it gently on top of the headstone. "I did something I thought I'd never do again," he said quietly. Not to Lily, to Elena. "I went back to surgery, saved a boy's life, and it cost me everything I'd built. The quiet, the invisibility, all of it." The wind moved through the trees. "But I think you'd understand," Marcus continued. "I think you'd know why I had to speak up, why I couldn't stay silent. Not when a child needed help." He thought about that night in the conference room, about the fear, about Lily's voice in his head telling him he was a superhero, about the moment he turned back and spoke. "Our daughter gave me courage," he said. "She reminded me who I used to be, who I still am." Lily stepped forward, placed her own crane beside her father's. 2 paper birds sitting together on the stone. "Hi, Mom," she whispered. Marcus put his arm around her. They stood there together, father and daughter, remembering, honoring, moving forward. When they left the cemetery, they walked hand in hand back to the car. The sun was setting. The sky was turning orange and pink. "Dad?" Lily said. "Yeah?" "Are you happy?" Marcus stopped walking, looked down at his daughter, at her dark hair, at Elena's eyes looking back at him, at the paper cranes on her backpack, at the girl who'd never stopped believing he was a hero, even when he'd stopped believing it himself. He thought about his office at Seattle Children's, about the surgeries he performed, about the lives he saved, about picking Lily up from school every single day at 3:15 without fail, about finally keeping both promises, to be present for his daughter, and to never turn away when a life needed saving. "Yes, sweetheart," he said. "I think I am." They walked to the car together, drove home through the quiet streets, had dinner, did homework. The ordinary rhythms of an extraordinary life. That night, after Lily was asleep, Marcus stood at his kitchen window, looked out at the city lights, thought about everything that had happened, about the janitor who'd spoken up, about the surgeon who'd come back, about the father who'd found his way home. True courage isn't the absence of fear or pain. It's the willingness to speak up and act when a life hangs in the balance, even when the world has given you every reason to stay silent. Because sometimes the quietest voices carry the greatest power, and sometimes the most ordinary hands perform the most extraordinary miracles. Marcus turned away from the window, checked on Lily one more time. She was asleep, paper cranes hanging above her bed, turning slowly in the dark. He'd lost so much. Elena, the life they'd built, the years he couldn't get back. But he'd gained something too, a second chance, a way forward, a daughter who saw him clearly and loved him anyway. And that, he thought, was more than enough.